Something important just happened for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and if you've been following the first wave of NFL free agency, you probably felt that something different was brewing inside the organization. The team just made a move that could quietly solve one of the biggest defensive problems they've been dealing with over the past few seasons. The Steelers have signed veteran nose tackle Sebastian Day, and this addition could have a much bigger impact on the defensive structure than it might seem at first glance. For a while now, Steelers fans have been watching the defensive line rotate pieces in the middle while the run defense never quite looked as dominant as it should have, especially considering the level of talent on that side of the ball. One of the issues that kept showing up on film was the way opposing offensive lines attacked the middle of the defense with double teams. The player often taking the brunt of those blocks was Keanu Benton, and while Benton has shown flashes of disruptive ability, the role he was being asked to play wasn't exactly built for his skill set. Benton's biggest strengths have always been his quick get-off, his explosive hands, and his ability to shoot gaps and get into the backfield quickly. That's the type of defensive lineman who creates pressure and tackles for loss, not necessarily the type designed to anchor against constant double teams at the nose tackle position. When offenses targeted him with multiple blockers, he sometimes got pushed backward, and that created running lanes that shouldn't have been there. That's exactly where Sebastian Day comes in. Day has built a reputation in the league as a reliable run-stopping interior lineman, someone capable of absorbing those double teams and holding his ground in the middle of the defensive line. His presence allows the Steelers to rebalance how they deploy their defensive front. Instead of forcing Benton into a role that limits his explosiveness, the team can now let him attack more freely, using his quickness to disrupt plays rather than simply surviving in the middle. Think about what that means for the defensive rotation. On early downs, when stopping the run is the top priority, Day can line up inside and do the dirty work, taking on blocks, controlling the interior gaps, and preventing offensive lines from climbing to the linebackers. That frees up the other defensive linemen to play faster and more aggressively, and when the situation shifts to passing downs, that's when the Steelers can unleash their more disruptive interior combination. Players like Cam Hayward, Derek Harmon, and Benton can rotate in those moments where the defense needs pressure, fresh legs, and interior push against the quarterback. That kind of situational rotation is something elite defenses rely on because it keeps players fresh throughout the game and throughout the entire season. Another important detail here is the long-term picture. Cam Hayward is still playing at a very high level, but everyone knows he's entering the later stage of his career. Keeping him fresh during the regular season could be crucial if the Steelers want him at full strength when the playoffs arrive. Adding a veteran like Day helps distribute the workload across the defensive line and prevents overuse of key players. But this move isn't happening in isolation. It's part of a bigger pattern that's starting to appear in Pittsburgh's offseason strategy. The Steelers have also added Jaquan Brisker, a hard-hitting safety and Pittsburgh native, and these kinds of additions suggest the front office, led by Omar Khan, is building depth across multiple defensive positions. When you step back and look at the bigger picture, the defense suddenly looks deeper at several key spots: defensive line, outside linebacker, and the secondary. That type of depth can be the difference between a good defense and a truly dangerous one, especially over a long NFL season, where injuries and fatigue inevitably test every roster. There's also another factor that could shape how all these pieces come together: the new defensive leadership under coordinator Patrick Graham. Unlike previous systems that sometimes struggled to maximize the talent on the roster, Graham has a reputation for putting players in positions where their strengths can shine. If that philosophy carries over into Pittsburgh, this defense could start looking very different from what fans have seen in recent years, and that raises a fascinating possibility. With stronger depth in the trenches, improved flexibility in the secondary, and players finally being placed in roles that match their skill sets, the Steelers may be quietly building a defense capable of becoming one of the most dangerous units in the league heading into the 2026 season. So now the question goes straight to the fans watching this. Do you think the addition of Sebastian Day could be the move that finally unlocks the full potential of the Steelers' defensive line? Or do you believe the team still needs more pieces before this defense can truly dominate? When you look deeper at how this defensive puzzle is coming together, it becomes even clearer that this move with Sebastian Day isn't just about adding another name to the roster. It's about redefining the way the Steelers' defense can operate snap after snap. With Day Day absorbing those heavy interior responsibilities, the entire structure of the defensive front becomes more flexible, and that flexibility can unlock the talent that's already in the building. Think about what happens when Keanu Benton is finally allowed to play more naturally in a role that emphasizes disruption rather than survival. His burst off the line, the quickness in his hands, and the ability to penetrate gaps are the kinds of traits that can completely ruin a play before it even develops. When he's freed from constant double teams at nose tackle, he can attack more aggressively, and that's exactly the kind of chaos defensive coordinators love to create inside the pocket. And when you pair that with a veteran like Cam Hayward still anchoring the line, the Steelers suddenly have a mix of experience and explosiveness that can be rotated depending on the situation. Hayward's leadership and technique have been staples of this defense for years, and even as he gets older, his ability to read plays and control the line of scrimmage still makes him one of the most respected interior defenders in the league. Now imagine him being able to stay fresher during games because the workload is spread out more effectively. That's where this entire rotation concept becomes important. Instead of relying on the same group to carry heavy snaps throughout every situation, the Steelers can now build a defensive line rotation that adjusts based on the down and distance. Early downs can feature Joseph Day handling the physical interior run responsibilities, while passing situations bring in the quicker, more explosive group that can pressure quarterbacks and collapse the pocket. But the ripple effect doesn't stop at the defensive line. When the interior becomes stronger against the run, it naturally helps the linebackers behind it. Linebackers are able to play faster when they're not constantly dealing with offensive linemen reaching the second level. That means cleaner pursuit angles, better tackling opportunities, and more plays being stopped before they turn into chunk gains. And then you look at the secondary additions, particularly the signing of Jaquan Brisker. His arrival adds a physical presence at safety, someone known for being aggressive around the line of scrimmage and willing to deliver hard hits in the run game. Pairing him with Deshaun Elliott could create a safety tandem that brings both toughness and versatility to the back end of the defense. What's especially interesting is how this might allow the Steelers to use different defensive packages more frequently. There's been discussion that Jalen Ramsey could spend significant time in a big nickel role, meaning he'd line up closer to the line of scrimmage rather than staying strictly on the outside. That kind of alignment gives the defense more flexibility against modern offenses that rely heavily on quick passes, tight end mismatches, and hybrid formations. If Ramsey is playing closer to the action and Brisker is patrolling the safety position, the Steelers can disguise coverages and shift responsibilities in ways that keep opposing quarterbacks guessing. Combine that with a stronger defensive line, and suddenly the entire defense begins to feel more unpredictable. Another layer to this story is the broader vision being shaped by general manager Omar Khan during this offseason. The early phase of free agency has already seen several calculated additions that weren't necessarily the flashiest moves, but were clearly designed to strengthen specific weaknesses on the roster. When teams approach roster building this way, it often signals that the front office has a clear blueprint for what they want the team to look like once the season begins. Depth across multiple positions, defensive line, safety, linebacker, and even the secondary suggests the Steelers want a defense that can rotate players, stay fresh, and remain physical for all 4 quarters. That's the kind of formula that historically fits the identity of Pittsburgh football. There's also the element of a new defensive philosophy under coordinator Patrick Graham. Coaches who are known for maximizing player strengths can dramatically change how effective a unit looks without necessarily needing a complete roster overhaul. If Graham can take these pieces and deploy them in smarter, more adaptable ways, the Steelers' defense might finally match the expectations that fans have had for years. So when you combine all these elements, the addition of Sebastian Joseph Day in the middle, the arrival of Jaquan Brisker in the secondary, the potential repositioning of players like Jalen Ramsey, and the leadership of veterans like Cam Hayward, you start to see the outline of a defense that could become one of the most physical and disruptive groups in the league. And if everything comes together the way the organization hopes, this unit might not just be good. It might become the identity of the team again, the kind of defense that controls games, forces turnovers, and gives the offense more opportunities to win. One more thing that really stands out when you step back and analyze everything that's happened so far this offseason is the philosophy behind these moves. The Steelers are not simply adding random pieces, they are adding players who allow other players already on the roster to perform closer to their natural strengths. That's a subtle difference, but it can completely change how effective a defense looks over the course of a season. Take the defensive line again as an example. For years, Steelers fans have expected dominance up front because of the talent on paper, yet the results sometimes felt inconsistent, especially when teams committed to running the ball directly up the middle. That's why the arrival of Sebastian Joseph Day could quietly become one of the most important additions of the entire offseason. A true run-stopping nose tackle does the type of work that doesn't always show up on the stat sheet, but makes life easier for everyone else around him. When that interior is stable, the edge rushers suddenly become even more dangerous. Pass rushers love obvious passing situations, and the best way to create those situations is by shutting down the run on early downs. If the Steelers start consistently forcing second and long or third and long scenarios, that's when the pass rush rotation can truly attack. Imagine offenses trying to block a rotation of edge players coming at them in waves, while the interior line collapses the pocket. Quarterbacks hate pressure up the middle because it eliminates their ability to step forward in the pocket. When that escape lane disappears, even elite quarterbacks start making rush decisions. But there's also a cultural element to all of this. Pittsburgh has always prided itself on playing physical, disciplined defense. For a while, fans have been waiting to see that identity fully return. The moves made so far suggest the front office wants to rebuild that foundation. Strong defensive line play, aggressive safeties, versatile defensive backs, and a system designed to maximize everyone's strengths. Another interesting angle is how this defense could evolve over the course of the season. Early on, there may be some adjustments as players learn the new system under defensive coordinator Patrick Graham, but if the pieces start clicking together, the ceiling of this unit could rise dramatically by the time the second half of the season arrives. That's usually when the best defenses separate themselves from the rest of the league. When communication improves, rotations become smoother, and players instinctively know where their teammates will be on each play. Depth becomes extremely valuable during that stretch of the season because injuries and fatigue start affecting every team, and that brings us back to the overall roster construction. By adding experienced veterans while still developing younger talent like Keanu Benton, the Steelers are creating a balance between immediate production and long-term development. Veterans stabilize the system, while younger players bring energy and upside. If the younger defensive linemen continue progressing and the veterans provide reliable structure around them, the Steelers could end up with one of the deepest defensive fronts in the conference. And when a team can rotate players without losing effectiveness, it becomes extremely difficult for opposing offenses to maintain rhythm. All of this is happening while the team continues to shape the rest of the roster through free agency and the upcoming draft. There are still positions to address and decisions to make, but the early direction of this offseason already tells us something important. The Steelers want to rebuild a defense that controls games again. For fans who remember the eras when Pittsburgh defenses dictated the pace of games, forced turnovers, and intimidated opposing offenses, these moves might feel like the first steps toward bringing that identity back. Now the big question becomes whether these additions will translate onto the field the way the organization expects. On paper, the pieces are starting to fit together, but the real test will come once the season begins and this group lines up against some of the best offenses in football. And as this offseason continues to unfold, one thing Steelers fans should keep in mind is that the first wave of moves often sets the tone for everything that follows. What